Hi, we're out on the range today, and we're talking about my top 5 firearms for SHTF or WROL or TEOTWAWKI. Now, the first thing I have to say is that we've got some weather coming in, and because of that and some other things going on, we're really under a great time constraint. I do not have time to refilm lengthy segments because I trip over a word or two. So I'm going to ask you to please be patient with my Shatner-esque pauses and my very annoying habit of tripping over words and transposing syllables and things like that. Also, you may have to put up with me coughing or sneezing or whatever else happens in our environment today. Okay, that having been said, top 5 guns for SHTF or TEOTWAWKI has been done to death. There's very little, perhaps nothing I'm going to say that you haven't already heard. Very few ideas or concepts that I have that other people haven't already discussed. The firearms on my top 5 list probably won't surprise anyone, but this is a topic that I have been contacted about again and again. There are lots and lots and lots of people that contact me asking me for my input on this topic, so here we are. What I'm going to discuss today are, first, some caveats and disclaimers. Second, what terms like WROL and TEOTWAWKI mean and what they mean to me. Third, my list of 7 criteria that I use to come up with my top 5 list. 4, we'll finally get around to displaying and demonstrating the firearms. And 5, I'm going to do something that a lot of people don't do in this type of discussion, and that is I'm going to demonstrate some firearms that I recommend you avoid for this application. Not necessarily bad firearms, just ones that I'm going to say are poor choices for your TEOTWAWKI application, and I recommend you avoid them. Now, I just used the word recommend twice, and that brings me to my list of caveats and disclaimers. 1, you'll often hear me say these are not recommendations, these are just the firearms that work best for me. That applies here today. However, I am going to make some recommendations of things that I think should be part of your planning process, certain niches that firearms can fill, not necessarily makes and models, but types of firearms that I think you should really consider. And when it comes to talking about the firearms that work best for me versus what I think you should really at least look at, I'll try to keep those things separate. Now, the second thing is that what we're talking about here today are my opinions. You've heard me say this before. My opinions are based on my education, my training, my experience. Different people have different experiences, so they have different opinions. I make no claim that my opinion has its origin in the mind of greatness. And although I do consider myself fairly well educated on this topic, I do not consider myself the leading subject matter expert. Many people do consider themselves to be that. I don't. However, when I talk about people have different experiences, so they have different opinions, that takes on an interesting meaning when we're talking about this particular subject. If I were to talk about my top 5 guns for rabbit hunting, which I have discussed in the past, I've gone rabbit hunting many, many times. I have a lot of first-hand experience with that. When we're talking about TEOTWAWKI and what might happen if an asteroid hits the Earth, or if there's a CME, or if there's a global economic collapse, or if we have a pandemic, not like the one we recently had, but a Stephen King, The Stand-esque kind of pandemic, what kind of things might happen? And you will have your self-proclaimed experts tell you, if that happens, people will do this. If this happens, people will do that. Such conclusions are really just hypothetical. They're just conjecture. Although we can look historically at things that have happened, like in the Weimar Republic, there's a story that inflation was so bad that someone had a wheelbarrow full of money, and that's how much money he needed to go down to the market and get a loaf of bread, and while he wasn't looking, someone dumped his money out and stole his wheelbarrow because it was worth more than the money in it. I doubt that that story is true, but it does make a good point. And although we know things like that historically, a lot of times those things may only have partial application to the things that today people expect might happen. And so this is a subject where a lot of people aren't going to have a great deal of first-hand experience, myself included. And when I talk about my education and my training and my experience on this particular subject, okay, I went to college, I took a cultural anthropology class, got an A. I took a sociology class, got an A. I took a psychology class, got an A. As a member of the military, I've been to a couple of third world countries. When I was in the National Guard, my unit went to New Orleans for the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. When I was a kid, I was not there at ground zero, but I was certainly in the area when Mount St. Helens erupted. Now, I could go on, but you get the point. I do have some level of education, training, and experience on this topic. And so, very typically, in discussions like this, I will say, disagreement is good. Logical, honest disagreement furthers a discussion. But in this particular discussion, I'm going to say that if you disagree with me, I'm going to ask you to ask yourself a question. That question is, on what is your opinion based? And if your opinion is based on the fact that you have seen every single episode of The Walking Dead, then perhaps you might want to reevaluate the validity of that opinion. Okay. Next on my list is, as you may have already noticed, this is a subject, not TEOTWAWKI in general, just firearms related to it, is a subject I could talk about all day. So we're going to make two versions of today's presentation. A short version and a long version. Yes, you're watching the long version. And it's going to require me to talk at great length to explain my criteria and why I chose these particular guns and so forth before we ever get there. And if you don't want to listen to me ramble all day, I recommend watching the short version. In fact, when you watch that, you can even skip forward through the talking segment of that to the part where you see me standing next to the sign that reads top 5, and then you'll get to the guns. But if you do that, please don't make a lot of commentary about all the things I left out or forgot to say. All of those things are in the long version. And if you watch the long version, please don't complain about how long it is, because you were given the option of the short version. Okay. Now, one more caveat, and this is a very important one. I absolutely, adamantly recommend everyone should have a 3-day survival pack. And when you are getting a 3-day survival pack, don't just get online and buy something that's labeled 3-day survival pack. Assemble it yourself, customized to your needs. But that having been said, I am in no way whatsoever recommending that someone become a doomsday prepper. Storing large amounts of food and ways to get food, and storing water and ways to get or purify water, and the list goes on. I am not recommending that at all. Nor am I discouraging that course of action. What I am saying is that if you have already decided that ramping up for doomsday is what you think you need to do, then today's presentation will have some information and some concepts and some ideas that you may very well find useful. Okay, that having been said, second thing, what do terms like WROL and SHTF mean, and what does TEOTWAWKI mean? Let's discuss that. Okay, SHTF, WROL, and TEOTWAWKI. What do those terms mean, and what do they mean to me? SHTF is an acronym, and it means excrement hitting and being rapidly spread by an air conditioning unit that moves air via a rapidly spinning propeller. And the implication is that you're in a situation where everything's going along pretty much okay, and then in a very short time, things go very badly. At least that's the way I interpret it. Really good example is, you're on the Titanic, everything's fine, then you hit an iceberg, and you have a real crisis. Things have gone from fine to horrible very quickly. Also, the Titanic disaster is a really good illustration of another point in this topic, but we'll talk about that later. Now, another example. I have a house that's on the coast, about a block from the beach. Not too far off the coast is a really major fault line. Remember a few years ago where they had the big tsunami in Japan? Same kind of thing off the west coast of the United States. Okay, we know geologically that for several thousand years at least, every 300 to 500 years, this fault line shifts significantly enough that it makes a very big, very destructive tsunami. All right, we know historically that the last time that happened was the year 1700, so 323 years ago. Every 300 to 500 years, it's been 323 years, we're in the red zone. This is a crisis that is going to occur somewhere between a month from now and well over a century from now. I probably won't live to see it, but it could happen, and it could happen while I'm there. And when it does, and I'm sitting there, everything's fine until suddenly the tsunami warning siren goes off. Yeah, a seagull has just dropped a big load in my air conditioning unit. SHTF. That is what that term means to me. Now, to give you a much bigger example, I'm going to tell you the very short version of a long story. And there are many different versions of this story, so please don't tell me that I'm telling it wrong. There's many different versions depending on which source you read. In 1983, middle of the night in the Soviet Union, their tracking system told them that the United States had launched a missile, just one, a missile at them. The officer of the day figured that's got to be a false alarm. Everybody be cool. Even when a few minutes later, they got notification that the United States had launched a couple more missiles. He said, no, it's got to be a false alarm. Everybody be cool. We're not going to fire back. And it was a false alarm. And the world was saved from nuclear Armageddon because one Soviet military officer was able to keep his cool. Now, what if someone else had been there that hadn't been able to keep their cool and had ordered that they shoot back? Tracking systems in the United States would have, oh, we got missiles coming. They would have shot back. You can see the problem there. This is really SHTF in that everything went along from pretty much okay to global catastrophe very fast. And we see in these examples that something like that could be locally for a few days, regionally for a few weeks, nationally for a few months, globally for years. Depends on what happens. Okay. Now, WROL, it means without rule of law. This is also something that, depending on the crisis, could be locally for a few days, globally for a few years, anywhere in between. And a lot of people will get wrapped around that particular axle of without rule of law. I don't see that as the thing. I see that as part of the bigger picture that's going on, whatever that bigger picture might be. Now, let me give you an example. I'm in New Orleans in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. There was a lot of flooding, and then the flooding is receding, so here's a couple of convenience stores that had, for a day or so, been pretty much underwater. Now they're not. I go into these places, and the boxed food, like boxes of cereal, that's all destroyed. But canned food and bottles of beverages, cans of beverages, are still very much intact. But as I'm looking around, all the canned food, all the bottled water, all the bottled or canned juice, all that kind of stuff is still there. The store hasn't been looted. Except what has been looted is the ATM has been smashed and all the cash is gone. Every scrap of tobacco and every bottle or can of alcohol is gone. Now, in a survival situation, that'd be about the last thing I'd take. I'd want potable water and canned food. But we're not dealing with people who were trying to stay alive in a crisis. These were criminals committing crimes because the police were really busy with a lot of other things, and so it was, at least locally, a WROL situation. And a lot of that kind of thing was happening. Okay, now, I'm going to say that WROL is going to be a part of this. TEOTWAWKI. That's TEOTWAWKI, and it stands for the end of the world as we know it. All right. This is something that could take many forms. Again, locally for a few days, regionally for a few weeks, nationally for a few months, globally for a few years. All depending on what happens. And a lot of people will get spun up over their fantasy scenarios of what they think might happen. And people will talk about asteroids hitting the Earth and CME, and I'm going to give a very short version of CME, coronal mass ejection. It's a solar event that, if it happens on a large enough scale, when everything lines up, it could destroy power grids worldwide for years. At least that's what some people hypothesize it can do. And that's one of those things that somewhere between next year and several centuries from now is almost certain that it eventually will happen. Again, will it happen in my lifetime? Very unlikely. But you have scenarios that some people will talk about, and some that I consider plausible, and some I consider possible, and some that I consider ridiculous. But people get caught up in these, and they want to concern themselves with the unique things that are going to happen in that situation. I look at this more in a big picture way, that whatever fantasy scenario you have, what it will result in is a situation where you have no services. There will be no hospital, no pharmacy, no EMS, no fire department, no police department, hence WROL. No gas stations or grocery stores will be open. The power will be out and that kind of thing. So whatever it is you need, you should already have. Whatever it is you need to do, you're going to have to do it for yourself. This is going to be the common thread among all these TEOTWAWKI scenarios. And I want to really make sure I make this clear. The end of the world might mean just the end of your world as you know it. And it might be something that happens locally or regionally for a short time, nationally or globally for a long time. And whether it's for a few days just in your local area or for a few years globally, you're still dealing with WROL. Now, in that type of situation, you're going to have criminals operating unchecked. But what you may also very well have is people who have previously not been criminals are now in a situation where they have no food, no water, no medical supplies. They're in real trouble. And they may resort to burglary and or robbery and or murder to get those things that they think they need to survive. And the way that you're going to deal with this is by having a well thought out, flexible, well executed plan. And part of that plan has to be firearms. Now that's the short version of what all those acronyms mean to me. Now, we're finally getting to some firearms. Let's talk about my 7 criteria. Okay, my 7 criteria for my top 5 list. And before I recite it, I have to preface this with something. And as I say this, please understand that I don't harbor any ill will toward anyone, but I have to explain this as part of the 7 criteria. In this format, it sometimes occurs that people will very negatively critique what I'm doing or what I'm saying, while they are speaking from a position of profound ignorance and demonstrating a fundamental lack of understanding of the situation. Now, let me give you an example. A while ago, we did a presentation on my top 5 handguns for deer hunting, and it generated a lot of hate mail from people who were convinced that hunting deer with a handgun was not legal. All right. In the state in which I reside, as long as you follow some very simple caliber restrictions, and you have a valid deer tag and it's deer season, you most certainly can hunt deer with a handgun. And these people are demonstrating their fundamental lack of understanding that here in the United States, as you go from one state to the next, hunting laws may be very different. And not just hunting laws, other laws as well. If you've done much traveling, you may have noticed that as you drive down the freeway and you cross a state line, sometimes the speed limit will change. Different states have different laws governing all kinds of things, and there are some people who have a fundamental lack of understanding of that reality. And this is very important when it comes to my 7 criteria. Now, another thing that people sometimes can't understand is that here in the United States, people will sometimes live under very different conditions, from the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam. Some people live in Metropolis, some people live in Smallville, some of my crew live in the middle of nowhere, several miles outside of Smallville. So as I go through my 7 criteria, please understand that not everyone lives in the same type of apartment or same type of house or same type of neighborhood or governed by the same laws that you do. Okay, with that, my 7 criteria are: number 1, subsistence hunting; 2, foraging; 3, accuracy, safety, reliability; 4, space and weight concerns; 5, the budget; 6, local laws; and 7, the number of assailants you may be facing. Now, when I list these like that, I know there are already people saying, wait a minute, no, that's wrong. You're talking about WROL. Why would you even mention local laws? Okay, we'll get to that. If I just list the criteria, then we go on from there. A lot of times people have a lack of understanding of why those are the criteria and what I'm talking about. So it's going to take a few minutes to break all of those down. 1, subsistence hunting. That means hunting to eat. There are some people who declare themselves experts in this subject that will talk about how subsistence hunting is going to be important and so forth. Okay, as I said, different people have different opinions. Remember, people live in different places with different laws under very different conditions. Depending on who you are, where you are, and whatever it is that you think might happen, for some people, in some situations, I'm going to say that yes, subsistence hunting is going to be something they do. But I am of the opinion that for the great majority of us, in the great majority of scenarios that might lead to some kind of catastrophe, subsistence hunting will be a very small or non-existent part of what's going on. Now, let me see if I can explain that. If your fantasy includes a scenario where about 90% of the people are dead, but whatever killed them didn't kill the indigenous fauna, and you're one of the unlucky ones that's still alive, okay, in that case, subsistence hunting might be a big part of what you're doing. But I'm of the opinion that that is a very unlikely scenario. What's going to be far more likely is things have broken down, trucks aren't bringing food to the grocery store, and after about 3 days, the grocery store is pretty much empty. At that point, people might very well start subsistence hunting. The thing is, though, for people who live in metropolitan areas, what is it that you're going to hunt if you live in Manhattan? As far as I understand, there's a lot of pigeons, maybe a lot of rats, some things like that, but not that many, and those resources would be depleted very quickly. Now, in the city where I live, I'm pretty close to one of the city parks, and it's not one of those parks that's just overrun with squirrels, but there's a few, and there are some pretty big fat squirrels. I'm going to say that on about day 2 or 3 of the grocery store being closed, someone's going to go out and shoot those squirrels, and that resource is going to be depleted very quickly. If you've seen very much of what we do here, you've seen that there are some deer who are frequent visitors to this range, and it's not just the same group of deer over and over, there's quite a few. Okay, that might look like a really good resource, but I'm going to tell you that we're close enough to a town that if there was any real food crisis, it would not be very long before those people were out here poaching those deer, and that resource would be depleted very quickly. For some people in some places, under some conditions, subsistence hunting will be some part of what they do. I'm of the opinion that for the great majority of us, it will be a very small to non-existent part. Now, there's more to that. And this is where I have to tell you that genius is not your sole bailiwick. There are people, particularly those who live in urban or suburban areas, that part of their plan for subsistence hunting is to take advantage of the local wildlife. For example, many cities will have parks where there's some kind of duck pond. I at one time lived in a city that had a creek that ran through it, and in many places in town there were little parks and things where people would feed the ducks, and there was a lot of ducks. Okay, you might have a plan that if things go to pieces, you're going to go down to that park with a piece of bread, a ball bat, and a gunny sack and get some ducks. Okay, the problem with that plan is if you thought of it, so did about 5,000 other people. There are some people who think that they're going to go down to the pond in the park and they're going to have something like an M80 firecracker, and depending on which version of that you have, it may or may not be water resistant, and they'll find some way to weight it down, and they're going to throw that in the pond, concuss all those fish, and scoop them right up. If you thought of that, so did about 5,000 other people. And the list goes on of all the plans that people have, and a crucial thing that they miss is if they thought of it, so did everyone else. There's also the danger that while you're whacking that duck and putting him in a bag, someone might come up behind you and whack you and take your bag. And even if that doesn't happen, those resources will be very quickly depleted. So on my top 5 firearms list, you're not going to see dedicated hunting type firearms, because I'm of the opinion that for the great majority of us, subsistence hunting isn't going to be a big part of what you're doing. And even if it is, I'm confident you can kill a deer with your AK. Okay, the second one, foraging. This is a big part of the romanticism that a lot of people feel for the concept of prepping for TEOTWAWKI. And keep in mind that when I say foraging, I'm not talking about food or equipment. I'm talking specifically guns and ammo. All right. I have actually talked to people who expressed the opinion that if you had a shotgun, you shouldn't have a 12 gauge because that's what everyone will loot from the store. You should get a 28 gauge because when all the other ammo is gone, you can go down to the store and forage and there'll still be a couple of boxes of that left. Okay, no there won't. Because when things get really desperate, someone's going to go see what ammunition is on the shelf and they're going to take ammo even if they don't have a gun to shoot it, hoping they can trade it later or maybe come up with a gun. And people who do hand loading for shotguns, they might get some ammo that's the wrong gauge just so they can cut it open and get the powder and shot out of it, help hand load their ammo. There's also the thing of some people think that having a handgun in caliber .357 Magnum is a great idea because depending on which gun you have and which brand of which caliber of ammo you buy, .357 Magnum can often shoot .357 Magnum, .38 Special, .38 Long Colt, .38 Short Colt, .38 Smith & Wesson. And again, in some cases, and we have a presentation just on this, but in some cases, depending on your gun and ammo choices, maybe even .38 Super Auto ammunition. Now, when it comes to foraging, that sounds like a great idea. And you will hear people say that .357 is good because when all the other ammo is gone, the store is going to have that one box of .38 Short Colt ammunition. It's very common that gun stores will have 1 or 2 boxes of some of those obscure calibers, and that'll still be there. Okay, no it won't. And I don't mean to sound pedantic or condescend to you, but genius is not your sole bailiwick. If you have a .357 and you know that it can chamber .38 Short Colt, so does everyone else. They all know that. And that box of ammo will be long gone. I would also have to say that earlier I talked about having a well thought out and flexible plan. If your plan includes that instead of stockpiling a good amount of 12 gauge ammunition, that instead you're going to go steal those last couple of boxes of 28 gauge ammo, I'd have to say that does not sound like a very good plan. So many people who are self-proclaimed experts will say that foraging is going to be a big part of what you're doing. And I'm not going to say that it won't happen. I'm just going to say that it's, in my opinion, a much smaller part of what's going on than other people seem to think. Okay, third on my list, accuracy, safety, efficiency. You have to have a firearm that you can operate correctly and safely, and that allows you to hit what you are shooting at. There are some people that can take your typical Smith & Wesson or Ruger double-action revolver, hold a good group with it. Then you hand them some kind of autoloader, and their group does this. There are some people in that category. There are some people that if you give them a single-action auto, like a 1911 platform, they're okay. Give them a double to single like this Beretta, and they just can't shoot it very well. There are people like that. So if you are someone who is like that, you either have to get to the range and do a whole lot more practice, or you have to get a gun that allows you to hit what you are shooting at. Now, in my opinion, in this type of environment, magazine capacity is going to be very important, in the sense that the more the better. And we'll discuss that in a few minutes. But there is no replacement for shot placement. You have to have a firearm that allows you to hit what you are shooting at. Now, in terms of operating the firearm safely and efficiently, okay, your firearm doesn't do you any good if the first shot you fire shoots you in the foot. You have to be able to operate the firearm safely, and you have to be able to operate it efficiently. Okay, there are some people that you hand them an auto-loading pistol, and they'll put the magazine in, and they just cannot remember to put a round in the chamber. And they are forever pulling out their pistol, there goes a rabbit, click, oh, I forgot to put a round in the chamber. There are people like that. And I've told this anecdote before. Go to the range with somebody who has an auto-loading pistol that has a manual safety, and we're doing a trail walk shoot. So you stand here by this post and you shoot that clanger. Okay, then you go down a little ways to another post and shoot another clanger. And pulls out the pistol, does a pretty good trigger pull, and it doesn't go off. Kind of looks at it, well, you got to disengage the safety. Oh yeah, right. Shoots it, re-engages the safety, holsters it, goes to the next point, comes out, aims, squeeze, and again, doesn't realize the problem, looks at the gun. Now, this is not a gun that I loaned to that shooter. That is their gun. You gotta disengage the safety. Oh, yeah, right. Disengage the safety, fire, put it back on safety, goes to the next target, and pulls the trigger, and again, you gotta disengage the safety. Oh, yeah, okay. If that sounds familiar to you, you either need to get to the range and do a whole lot more training, or get rid of that gun and replace it with something that you can operate efficiently. You have to have a firearm that you can operate correctly and safely, and that allows you to hit what you're shooting at, even if it's not necessarily the latest, greatest, up-to-datest, highest capacity, whatever. Now, number 4 on the list is space and weight concerns. Okay, depending on who you are, where you are, and what it is that's your fantasy of what's going to happen, your plan may be to evacuate. Your plan may be to shelter in place. And which one of those is right, there really isn't any answer. It just depends on who you are, where you are, and what happens. For some people, most of the time evacuating will be right. For some people, most of the time, staying in place will be right. But no matter where you are or what you're doing, I am of the opinion that part of your plan should be realizing that you may have to evacuate on foot at night. Thus, you you need a gun that's relatively light and ammunition that's relatively light and small enough that you can fit a lot of it into the finite space of a pack. Okay, now why would I say evacuate at night on foot? All right, just that is something I could go on about for an hour. But to give you as concise a version as I can, you have some situations that will become SHTF very quickly. But in some situations, you'll have this transitional period. Now, earlier I talked about the Titanic. Here's where it comes to be a good example again. There are different versions of the story, but according to the documentaries I've seen on it, shortly after the Titanic hit the iceberg and people realized, yeah, we're in a little trouble here, some lifeboats were deployed, but nobody wanted to get on them. They thought, oh, the ship is unsinkable and so on and so forth. And later, as the ship was at quite an angle, really sinking, and it became time to, oh, we got to get on the lifeboats, then at that angle they were very hard to deploy, and a lot of them couldn't be deployed correctly, and everybody was in trouble. Okay, you see that transitional period between everything's fine and everything is lost. Sometimes you have to get out while the getting's good. What's that? There's a song, good things come to those who wait, but not to those who wait too late. Yeah. Sometimes, depending on what's going on, in that transitional period between normalcy and chaos, you'll have a thing where the government is trying desperately to keep control of things. And so they're going to do, in typical government fashion, they're going to man some checkpoints and they're going to set up roadblocks and they're going to keep you in whatever city you're in so you can't evacuate. They're not going to go in there and help you. They're just going to keep you there. And you not being a passenger on the Titanic and realizing you got to get while the getting's good, you're going to want to get out of there, but all the roads are blocked. So your car isn't going to do you any good. Even your bicycle might not do you any good. They'll have enough manpower to block roads, but not block the entire countryside. And so you may very well have to be on foot, cross-country, at night. You need to know how to navigate. But this is something that I think should be part of almost everyone's plan. And that means you're going to have the space and weight concerns of your firearm and ammunition. Obviously, what those concerns will be will depend on you and your capabilities and limitations. Now 5, the budget. In picking the firearms that I picked, I took into consideration that not everybody has the resources to put a whole lot of money into this. Okay, number 6, your local laws. Now we're talking about what is probably going to be a WROL scenario. Okay, but whatever it is that you think might happen, that might happen next week, or 20 years from now, or never. And so between now and 20 years from now, when that happens, you've got to have your stuff stored in some kind of proximity where you can get to it when you need it. And I'm of the opinion that the chances of you getting into a really bad legal situation because you have an illegal firearm, illegal ammo, or illegal magazines are greatly more than your chances of needing that stuff when the crisis occurs. And so spending 20 years of being in possession of something you shouldn't have is not really a good thing to do. So observe your local laws. Now finally, point 7, the number of assailants. I have sat right here and told you that in legitimate citizen-involved self-defense shootings, the citizen resolves that situation favorably with 6 rounds or less the great majority of the time. I don't mean that's a mean average, I mean the great majority of the time, 6 rounds or less. Now we're talking about a situation that may be totally different. And so magazine capacity takes on a whole new importance. It still does not trump being able to hit what you're shooting at, but it takes on a whole new importance. And I'm going to say that whatever self-defense situation you get into in this kind of environment, In my opinion, the great majority of the time, you will be significantly outnumbered. You'll be by yourself facing 3, 4, 5 people. You'll be a part of a group of 2 or 3 people that's facing 5, 8, 10 people. You will be significantly outnumbered. Therefore, magazine capacity, your ability to change magazines quickly, or if you have something that doesn't have detachable box magazines, whatever, your ability to reload quickly, and round count both in your firearm and in your equipment takes on a whole new importance. Okay, so with all of that, let's finally talk about some firearms. And remember, the top 5 isn't going to be in any particular order. And the first thing I want to show you isn't necessarily a firearm, but a firearm combo. Let's take a look. First on my list, and remember the list is not in any particular order, is not going to be a make and model of firearm, but a concept of firearms usage, which is having a rifle or carbine, and bear with me if I use those terms interchangeably, rifle or carbine and a handgun that's the same caliber. Many different configurations, from things that are really common, like a .22 rifle and a .22 pistol, to things that are kind of obscure, like an M1 carbine and caliber 30 US carbine, and a Ruger Blackhawk and caliber 30 carbine. Yes, they exist. We have a presentation on them. All the way up to things that I would consider very impractical for this application, like this rifle in caliber .444 Marlin backed up by this handgun in caliber .444 Marlin. The different configurations of rifle and pistol combo that are the same caliber is almost limitless. Now, in discussing this particular topic, one of the problems I run into is that before I can even begin talking about the advantages and disadvantages of this kind of setup, I am interrupted with the question, why would you do that? And often that question isn't phrased like, why would you do that? But more phrased like, why would you do that? Okay, so before I go any farther, let me show you a couple of things. I have my chronograph set up, and I have my Ruger Mark III pistol loaded with CCI Mini Mag 22 long rifle 36 grain hollow point. .1042, .1094, .1037, .1080, .1052, .1085, and .1087. Now let's see how that compares to the rifle. Now I have my Ruger 1022 loaded with the same CCI Mini Mag 22 long rifle 36 grain hollow point. .1207, 1178, 1171, 1235, 1213, and 1220. Let's try another gun. Now I have my Beretta 92FS, which is loaded with Winchester White Box 9x19 115 grain full metal jacket round nose. .1106, 1114, 1117, 1123, and 1085. Now, let's see how that ammunition performs in the rifle. And now I have my Beretta CX4 Storm rifle loaded with the same Winchester White Box 9x19 ammunition. .1333, 1311, 1338, duplicate 1338, 1346, and 1371. Now let's go crunch those numbers. Well, I crunched the numbers, and it comes with the normal caveats that chronographs don't always agree with each other, and certain environmental factors like ambient temperature and elevation can affect chronograph results. And the results I got were, with the .22 pistol, a mean velocity of 1,068, the .22 rifle, 1,204. That's a gain of 136 feet per second. That's a lot more talking about a .22 long rifle. Now with the 9mm, with the pistol I got a mean velocity of 1,109. The rifle, 1,339. That's a gain of 230 feet per second. That is a lot more when you're talking about 9x19. So what we can take from this is, depending on your firearm and ammunition choices, when you go from the pistol to the rifle, you can get a lot more power out of the same cartridge. We have our favorite target, soda jugs, and I'm going to go back 15 yards and I'll shoot the target on your left with the 9mm pistol, the target on your right with the 9mm rifle, and let's see the difference in effect. So the jug shot with the pistol, the jug shot with the rifle. Both are effective, the rifle just more so. And I know that this is not the definitive test, but I think it does make the point. Now I have two reactionary targets set up, and I'll go back about 20 yards and I'll shoot the target on your left with the .22 pistol, the target on your right with the .22 rifle. And in both cases I'll shoot as fast as I think I can hit, and we'll see how my groups and my times compare. Here's our groups, and remember this is me shooting offhand from 20 yards, and both of these groups are okay. I can cover the pistol group with my fist, but barely. But what we can definitely see here is that the group with the rifle was far better than the pistol and significantly faster. Next on my list, and remember this list is in no particular order, is a pocket gun. A really small handgun that can fit in your pocket. Now, what size of gun will fit in your pocket will depend on how you're built and how you dress. But something that's genuinely small, not a Glock 19 or something they call a compact, but a real pocket gun, is something that's on my top 5 list. And when I say that, people immediately are incredulous to that, and they will say, wait, in a TEOTWAWKI situation, what kind of good would a gun like this be? Okay, give me a moment to explain. Remember earlier we talked about the transitional period? And just how much of a transitional period there will be between everything's more or less okay and everything's complete anarchy depends a lot on your fantasy of what you think will happen. But what I perceive is that in some situations, depending on where you are and what's going on, there may be a period of days, weeks, even a couple of months between everything's more or less okay and complete anarchy. This transitional period where the government tries desperately to keep control. And the way they will do that is keeping people in certain places, not letting them in other certain places, manning checkpoints and all that kind of thing. And again, that's why I talk about you may have to make your evacuation at night, cross-country, on foot. Well, in situations like that, if you have to go through government checkpoints, I can be very confident that one of the things the government is going to make of paramount importance is trying to take away all of your guns. And if you have to go through a government checkpoint, if you have a really little gun and you carry it in the right place, it's far less likely that they're going to find it. And having a little gun like this is a whole lot better than having no gun. Now, In talking about which kinds of makes and models would be a good idea and which kinds wouldn't be, we have to go back to our criteria of it has to be a firearm that you can carry safely, operate correctly, and allows you to hit what you are shooting at. And that applies to everything. But in talking about pocket guns is a really good time for me to demonstrate that concept. Let's take a look. I have two small handguns, a Ruger LCP in caliber .380 ACP and a Smith & Wesson Bodyguard in caliber .380 ACP. Both have a capacity of 6+1, both are auto-loading pistols, both are very similar in size and weight. But how will they compare in accuracy when I'm shooting them? I'll go back 15 yards and I'll shoot the target on your left with the Smith & Wesson Bodyguard, the target on your right with the Ruger LCP. With both, I'll shoot as fast as I think I can hit, and let's see how my groups and my times compare. Now when you look at these two groups, the group with the Smith & Wesson Bodyguard, my aiming point was the center of the target, and that's about where the shots are. At 15 yards, that's not a bad group. Now this flyer, I really have no explanation for that. But when we look at the group with the Ruger LCP, I knew that would hit a little high, so my aiming point was actually at the bottom of the center, and it was still that high. So even though the group is a little better than this one, it's not where I want it to be. So between these two firearms for this application, clearly the Smith & Wesson Bodyguard is, for me, the better choice. So when selecting a pocket gun for this application, again, carrying it safely, operating it correctly, hitting what you're shooting at are the most important things. I'm going to say that second to that is magazine capacity and the ability to reload quickly. Now when it comes to picking which one is the right one, there are some people that would advise that you should have a rifle of a particular caliber, a handgun that's a different caliber, and a pocket gun that's still a different caliber, so you can forage more types of ammunition. But remember, I think that foraging is going to be a much smaller part of what's going on than other people think it will be. So what I'm going to say is the right thing for me is to have a pocket gun that's the same caliber as my primary carry handgun. And one choice I might make is the Ruger LCR double action revolver in caliber 9x19. Now granted, this is about as big as you could get and still have it something that I would call a pocket gun, but it is quite a bit smaller than the Beretta 92FS. But the real bottom line as to what pistol that I'm going to pick, the Sig Sauer Model 365. Auto-loading pistol, caliber 9x19, tritium illuminated sights. When I bought this one, it came with two 10-shot magazines. 12-shot magazines are readily available, and although it is a lot bigger than the Smith & Wesson Bodyguard, it's still something that will easily fit into my pocket. Now, if I were going to make any recommendations, it would be, if this were the model that you decided to go with and you wanted to carry it in your pocket, I would say make sure that you get the correct pocket holster, and if possible, get the one that has the manual safety. Next on my list is a full-sized handgun. Now what is or isn't a full-sized handgun? This one is a lot bigger than this one, but I'm going to call them both full-sized handguns. The Smith & Wesson M&P Compact has the word compact in the name, and it is a lot smaller than the Beretta. However, I can't fit it in my pocket. I can't really carry it any more easily than I can carry the Beretta, so I'm going to call this full-sized. Now, in talking about a full-sized handgun, remember our 7 criteria still apply, but there's something I'm going to add to that, and please listen carefully to the disclaimers as where I say the great majority of the time, not absolutely every time. I'm going to say most, not absolutely all, but most. Okay. Please pay attention to those disclaimers. And what I'm going to say is that as long as your full-size handgun meets the 7 criteria, and you can carry it safely, operate it correctly, hit what you're shooting at, and the handgun itself works properly, then the great majority of the time, almost any handgun is going to be better than none. If the only handgun you have is an Italian-made replica of a Colt Walker cap and ball revolver, then as long as it meets those criteria, you can carry it safely and you can hit what you're shooting at, this is going to be way, way, way better than no handgun at all. Now, we're not going to shoot this revolver today. We already have a presentation specifically on that revolver. You can watch that and see it operated in great detail. But I do want to do a demonstration with a couple of our other handguns. Let's take a look. Both of these groups were fired from 15 yards, and I shot the group on your right with my Smith & Wesson Model 15 caliber 38 Special, the group on your left with the Smith & Wesson M&P Compact caliber 9x19. Now, it took me about 32 seconds to shoot the group on your right and about 38 seconds to shoot the group on your left. I actually took more time shooting the group on your left, and we can see that it's a terrible group, especially in comparison to the group shot with the revolver. So what's the problem here? Well, there's nothing wrong with the Smith & Wesson M&P Compact, and it would appear that there's nothing wrong with my ability to shoot a handgun. But there's a lot wrong with the combination of the Smith & Wesson M&P Compact and me. I can't shoot this handgun very well at all. Okay, before we get to the point of that demonstration, let me reiterate my disclaimer that I'm going to now stand here and talk for a long time, and we're under too much of a time crunch for me to refilm this segment many times, so again, please bear with me. Okay, that having been said, what did we learn from that demonstration? That I can shoot a Smith & Wesson Model 15 more accurately than I can shoot a Smith & Wesson M&P Compact. So, all right, when I talk about guns for TEOTWAWKI, and I talk about the need for a gun that's light, and ammunition that's light, and good magazine capacity, comparing these two handguns, well, the Compact certainly is more compact. It's a little lighter. It's caliber 9x19 instead of 38 Special. 9x19 ammunition is smaller, and depending on which configuration you buy, most of the time it's going to be lighter. Not only that, right now at my local stores, 9x19 ammunition is significantly more available and less expensive than 38 Special ammunition. Not only that, this pistol has a 12-shot detachable box magazine. I can reload an autoloader with the detachable box magazine a whole lot faster than I can reload a revolver using a speed loader. So, in talking about firearms for TEOTWAWKI, the M&P Compact is the clear winner in every category except one which is arguably the most important, and that is being able to hit what I'm shooting at. And I can't stress that point enough. Now, also to make that point, I've got this Ruger Blackhawk caliber .357 Magnum. Now, this is a single action revolver. You have to cock it each time. And to load it, you open this loading gate, put in one round, rotate, put in one round, rotate, till you get all 6 in there, snap that shut. Then you fire it by cocking the hammer each time. Then when you go to unload and reload, eject out one round until you get all 6 out, then put one at a time in, and you're ready to go again. Slow to load, slow to shoot, slow to reload. But if this is the only handgun you have, or you have a variety of handguns, but this is the only one that allows you to hit what you're shooting at, and that's what you have to go with. Now, that having been said, luckily I am in possession of several auto-loading pistols that I can shoot fairly accurately, like my Beretta 92FS. And I have to talk about the things you really have to do with your TEOTWAWKI handgun and the criteria that you use in selecting it and so forth. But in doing so, I'm going to say some things that will sound totally contradictory to things I've said on past occasions. Let me explain a little bit. There are some things that in your daily life, legitimate citizen-involved self-defense shootings will have in common with what you may face in a WROL or TEOTWAWKI situation, depending on your fantasy of what's going to happen. There are some things that you will have in common, but there are some things that are going to be very different. And so things that I say about self-defense shootings aren't necessarily applicable to TEOTWAWKI type shooting. Such as, when I was shooting those silhouettes, I was hitting the target every time with the M&P Compact, and it's a half-size silhouette from 15 yards. And people will say, well, if you had a full-size target and you're shooting from realistic self-defense distances like 3 yards, then that was absolutely acceptable accuracy. Okay, you may have a point, except I'm going to say that in a TEOTWAWKI situation, even though I said subsistence hunting probably not a big part of what you're doing, it might be a little part. And the accuracy I got with the revolver was sufficient to shoot a rabbit. With the compact, was not. There's also a thing that 3-yard thing, that might very well happen, but the 15, 20, 30, 50-yard thing might very well happen as well. And at that kind of distance, the accuracy I was getting with the M&P Compact was completely unacceptable to me. The rules have changed a little bit. Now, I have said many times that in legitimate citizen-involved self-defense shootings, the great majority of those cases are resolved favorably for the citizen with 6 rounds or less. And that is not a statistical sleight of hand. I'm not talking about mean averages. I'm saying that in the great majority of cases, they're resolved favorably with 6 rounds or less. And even in those cases where more than 6 rounds are fired, when someone shoots 8, 10, 12 rounds, most of the time when someone shoots more than 6, those shots are unnecessary and legally highly questionable. Now, go check out some of the videos John has over at Active Self-Protection and you'll see this kind of thing. A citizen is in what would be an absolute legitimate self-defense shooting, and then their adversary, the robber or whatever, he runs away and they keep shooting at him. Unnecessary, legally highly questionable. And so even when you see cases where someone shot 10 rounds, yeah, a lot of times they'd already resolved it favorably with 6 or less. Now, more ammo is not a bad thing. Having a gun like this with a 10 or 15 shot magazine is not a bad thing. About the only time it would be a bad thing in your typical self-defense shooting is if you're one of those people who can't maintain any kind of fire discipline, can't handle any kind of stress rationally, and you end up shooting something like this until your magazine's empty. If you're that guy, then maybe high-capacity magazines aren't a good idea. But if I have an auto-loading pistol that I can shoot competently, like this one, then having high-capacity magazines isn't bad, but it's most of the time not necessary. Okay, I've said that and I'll stand by that, but now things have changed. Again, depending on your fantasy of scenario, when you get into a self-defense shooting in a WROL, TEOTWAWKI type situation, you don't have to hold out until the police arrive. You have to hold out until it's over. And I'm of the opinion that you will be significantly outnumbered quite often. And I don't mean outnumbered like there's 2 of them and 1 of you. I mean there's 4 of them and 1 of you, or 7 of them and 2 of you. Significantly outnumbered. Magazine capacity takes on a whole new importance. Now, in talking about firearms like this SIG M17 and this Beretta 92FS, The Beretta 92FS is the commercially available version of the M9, which has been standard military issue for decades, but it's now being phased out in favor of the M17. With that, it is inexorable that people are going to debate which one of these is better. I'm going to say that neither of them is better, it's just which is better for you. Some people love the double to single action configuration of the M9, other people have great difficulty mastering it. They can't shoot it very accurately. Now the very short, crisp striker action trigger pull of the M17 is a big plus for a lot of people, but a lot of people also just can't remember to disengage the safety when they want to fire. And so that's a negative. And the debate over which one of those is better goes back and forth with things like that. But what always comes up is a debate about magazine capacity. The M9 has a 15-shot magazine. I know there's different magazines available now, but traditionally military issue has been 15. The M17 has a 17-shot magazine. Yes, I know 21s are available, but for right now I'm talking about the 17. And people will say that the 17 is a big advantage over 15. Okay, again, in typical citizen-involved self-defense shootings, most of those are resolved with 6 rounds or less. And I've issued this challenge before. If you can find a documented case where someone got into a legitimate citizen self-defense shooting and failed to solve their problem with 15 rounds, but solved it with the 16th, if you can find such a case, please send me a link to it. I'm going to say something like that is in the 1 in a million category. Okay, so when people debate over 17 versus a 15-shot magazine, I consider that just minutia and something that is not a legitimate part of the debate. However, when we leave that behind and we go to TEOTWAWKI, then all of a sudden magazine capacity is extremely important. 17 over 15, is that going to be an advantage? Maybe a little bit sometimes, but when you talk about the 21-shot magazines that are readily available for the M17, all of a sudden that is, in my opinion, a big advantage and may very well come to play. I'm going to say that 21 is significantly more than 17, and it's a lot more than 15, and this is something that needs to be part of your decision-making process. As where before in concealed carry, personal protection, home defense, magazine capacity isn't totally unimportant, but debating over which is better, 15 or 21, it's just not going to make a difference the overwhelming majority of the time. I'm going to say in this situation, TEOTWAWKI, WROL, it may very well make a difference. Now, another thing that's going to be a big part of what's going on is, as I talked about before, the need to evacuate on foot, and all you've got is what is in your pack. For some people, they can put on a 60-pound ruck and off they go. Other people that maybe aren't in as good a shape, or maybe significantly older, or who have arthritic knees, then every pound counts. A few ounces here and a few ounces there can really count. And you have to take that into consideration. Now for that, something that I think is a really great choice, Ruger 5.7. Auto-loading pistol, it's very light, has 20-shot magazines. Okay, 20-shot mag versus the 21 of the M17. I'm going to say that's close enough. But it's caliber 5.7 by 28. The ammunition for 5.7 is light. Let me put that in perspective. When you buy 5.7 by 28 ammunition, there's a variety of different projectile weights available, but in my experience, 40 grain projectiles are most common. For 9 by 19, there's different projectile weights available, but in my experience, 115 or 124 are most common. If you weigh the ammunition, the entire cartridge, casing, propellant, bullet, the whole thing, and compare 5.7 by 28 with 40 grain projectiles versus 9 by 19 with 115 grain projectiles, depending on what brand of ammo, they might vary by a grain or two. But looking at it in a big picture, if I did my math right, 100 rounds of 5.7 ammo is going to weigh about 24 ounces. 100 rounds of 9 by 19, 41 ounces. That's from 1.5 pounds to over 2.5 pounds. A pound difference, again, to some people, not a big deal. To a lot of people, a very big deal. And you have to take things like that into consideration. So what I'm going to say is, obviously, paramount is that you can operate it correctly, carry it safely, hit what you're shooting at. Second to that, magazine capacity, ammunition that is light, firearm that is light. And those are the main things you have to go with. Okay, so with that, what's going to be my choices? My choices are not going to surprise anyone. It's going to come down to the finalists of the Beretta 92FS and the SIG M17. Again, no surprise there. Both are relatively light guns. I can shoot both of them relatively competently. They're both 9x19. They both have good magazine capacity. The SIG has the advantage of a significantly better magazine capacity. All right. Now, when I get to the bottom line of this, there's a couple of things to take into consideration. Remember that I said I'm of the opinion that foraging might take place, but it's going to be much smaller than what other people think it will be. If foraging does take place, 9mm is very popular. If there's that transitional period where the military was trying to keep hold of things before everything went to chaos, then being able to forage military magazines, military ammunition, might be something that's going on. So the advantage not only of a 9mm, but of a military issue 9mm, something that can use military magazines, might be a real plus. Now, bottom line, if I'm going to pick one, I'm going to go with the Beretta 92FS. No surprise. Even though the M17 has some advantages, there's two major advantages that the 92FS has that apply specifically to me. One is that, having been in the military and so forth, I have over the years been able to acquire lots of magazines for my Beretta 92FS. The M17, not so much. Another thing is that I have the Beretta CX4 Storm rifle that can use the 92FS magazines. I do not have a carbine that uses the M17 magazines. Now, obviously, these are things that apply to me and not necessarily to other people, but these are my choices. Next on my list is a rifle. Now, we've already talked about having a carbine that shoots the same caliber and uses the same magazines as your pistol. This Ruger LC carbine in caliber 5.7x28 uses the same magazines and shoots the same ammunition as this Ruger 5.7 in caliber 5.7x28. Also, I know people will ask, the manufacturer custom made this holster for me. It fits my LBE belt. It's so far shown itself to be an outstanding holster, and we're going to do an extended review of it in the very near future. But we've talked about that concept. Now, let's abandon the concept of carbine and pistol of the same caliber and concentrate just on rifles. Okay, in talking about rifles, all the same criteria apply in the sense of you have to be able to operate it correctly and safely, shoot it accurately. It should be light with ammunition that's fairly light, and so on and so forth. But I want to, at this point, make something very clear. And that is, your firearm also has to conform with your local laws. Now, between right this minute when you're watching me and whenever this doomsday you're preparing for occurs, could be 1 day from now, could be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now. And in the 20 years or so between today and when that crisis occurs, your chances of getting into a very bad legal situation because you're in possession of some prohibited firearm or some prohibited magazine greatly outweigh the chances of you needing that prohibited firearm or prohibited magazine in any kind of crisis. Everything you have should conform with your local laws. Okay, that having been said, once you cover the basis of you can operate it correctly, shoot it accurately, and all that other stuff, if I were to make a recommendation, it would be that your rifle should be semi-auto, utilize detachable box magazines, and those magazines should have a good capacity. such as a 30-shot magazine. Now, for some popular platforms like AKs and ARs, I've seen 40, 50, I think I've even seen 60-shot magazines, and I don't mean those curlicue ones, I mean straight magazines. But I find that those can be really cumbersome. It's difficult to find mag pouches for them. So for me, I really like 30-shot magazines. Now, the LC Carbine has a 20-shot mag, and I'm going to say that's sufficient. But if I were to make a recommendation, it would be that 15-shot mags are absolutely dead minimum. Now, as soon as I say that, someone will show me some kind of firearm that has a 13-shot mag. And he'll say, well, that's good because it's almost as much as 15. That's like saying you took a test and got a score that was almost enough to get a D. Well, if it was almost enough to get a D, oh, that's an F. I'm really going to say that 15-shot mags are a dead minimum. Preferably mags that are quite a bit more than that. Now, with that criteria put in place, there's lots of rifles that could fill this niche. And some will be legal in some jurisdictions while they're not legal in other jurisdictions. Some will be really good for some people while they're not so good for other people. I couldn't even begin to cover all of them. But I do want to talk about some that I think make pretty good examples or represent what might be somewhat popular. Now, one rifle that I love to show is my M1 carbine. Depending on which version of the M1 carbine you get, which source you read, it could weigh 5.3, 5.5 pounds. Either way, it's a light rifle. And it's semi-auto and utilizes detachable box magazines. These originally had 15-shot magazines. These days, 30-shot magazines are readily available. Caliber 30 carbine is a small cartridge, and that's a plus, but it creates concerns about its power. I'm going to say it's certainly of adequate power for this application. We have a presentation on that. And the ammunition is, again, small, and it's light. Now, when I talk about ammunition being light or heavy, you have to say that in the sense of compared to what? Well, since 5.56 NATO was really popular, I'm going to say, in this case, compared to 5.56 NATO. Now, if you have 5.56 NATO with the green tip steel core 62 grain penetrator ammunition, and you weigh not just the projectile, but the entire cartridge, it weighs a virtual identical amount to 30 carbine ammunition. 30 carbine has a much heavier projectile, but a smaller casing. So in terms of weight, they're about the same. But what if you had 5.56 NATO with 55 grain projectiles? That's really what's more common on the commercial market. Okay, well in that case, if I did my math right, if you had 100 rounds of 5.56 NATO, 55 grain projectile, and you wanted to carry that same weight of ammunition in 30 carbine, well, instead of 100 rounds, if it's the same weight, how many rounds would you have? You'd have 96. It's really just about identical in weight. So for this application, the 30 carbine shot from an M1 carbine might be a really good choice. However, it has, in my opinion, two really big downsides. One is that somewhere along the way, somebody decided that these old military rifles that your grandpa mail-ordered for $39.95, they're now highly valuable collector's items. And if you wanted to get a decent M1 carbine, it might cost you double what you'd pay for a decent AR platform. The other downside is the availability and cost of the ammunition. Decades ago, when I got my first M1 carbine, every gun store had 30 carbine ammunition. These days, I go to several of my local stores, and they quite often don't have it, and when they do have it, it can be quite expensive. So, again, if I were to make a recommendation, it would be that if you already have an M1 carbine and you have a good supply of magazines and ammunition, then it might be a good choice for this application, but I would not recommend running out and buying one. Okay, another thing that's really popular for people who are talking about this subject is some kind of AK platform in caliber 7.62 by 39. AKs, if you get a good one, they are rugged, they are durable, they are reliable, they are simple. And 7.62 by 39 is of more than sufficient power for this application. There is, for me, one downside. 7.62 by 39 ammunition is significantly heavier than 5.56 NATO or other things like that. And for a lot of people, that could be prohibitive. Now, as soon as I say that, someone says, well, what about an AK in caliber 5.45 by 39? Okay, that would solve that problem. But again, when I go to my local stores, some of which are pretty big and have good supplies of ammunition, they rarely have 5.45 by 39. It's not something that's common. I'm sure you can mail order it, but for me, its rarity, for lack of a better word, is prohibitive. So, what's going to be really popular? An AR platform. AR platforms, the ammunition is relatively small, relatively light, of sufficient power. AR platforms are everywhere. There's different versions of AR platform, but if you have an AR platform that's shooting 5.56 NATO, every one I have ever seen uses the same magazine. If there's an AR platform in 5.56 NATO that uses a different magazine, I've never seen it, never heard of it. AR platform is going to be very popular and for most people a good choice. Okay, and that brings me to what's going to be my choice? Well, in a big picture sense, my choice is not going to surprise anyone. In the specific model that I choose, might surprise you a little bit. My choice is going to be an AR platform. Now, if you've seen very much of what I've done, you know that my go-to AR is this A1. It has A2 handguards on it, but it's an A1. I use this for all kinds of demonstrations. If you see me in the field, there's a really good chance this is the rifle I've got with me. I like this rifle. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for everybody, but for me, it's the right choice. Why? Okay, I don't really like ARs with the removable carrying handle because when you take the carrying handle off and put those optics on, just about every optic I've seen is something I really don't care for. I really prefer the peep sights. And the A1 has a 20-inch barrel as opposed to most of your more modern ARs are going to be 16-inch barrels. And the sight radius on a rifle with a 20-inch barrel is a little bit longer. My eyes can focus on it better, and I can shoot it more accurately than I can the shorter barreled versions. There's also the thing that the 20-inch barrel gives you a little, not much, but a little more power than the 16-inch barrel rifle does. Then there's the thing that a lot of your newer versions, especially with the removable carrying handles, they'll have knobs here to take the carrying handle off. Even if you compare it to this A2, which does not have a removable carrying handle. The A2 has a brass deflector and it's got the knobs that control the rear sights. It's just got more stuff sticking out. The A1 is sleeker and I'm less likely to catch it on my LBE and things like that. But one of the biggest things for me that makes the A1 better for me is the weight. Right out of Marine Corps basic training, the weight of an M16A1 is 6.5 pounds, okay? Right out of Marine Corps infantry training school, the weight of an M16A2 is 7.9 pounds, almost a pound and a half heavier. And in this application, that can make a lot of difference. So for me, the A1 is the way to go. Now, there are a couple of drawbacks to the A1. One of them being, look at these two barrels. You see how the A2 has a much thicker barrel? There's a reason for that. The thicker barrel will allow you to do a lot more sustained fire. You can shoot a lot more rounds in a short time before you overheat and damage that barrel. And for a military issue firearm that has fully automatic capability, that's a big plus. But I'm not in a military setting. I don't have to worry about being in Somalia. I have to worry about defending myself against a few people, not a battalion of people. And so I'm probably not going to shoot that many rounds. And remember, because I'm not talking about class 3 stuff, both of these firearms were purchased on the commercial market, they're both semi-auto, then shooting a lot of full auto stuff and overheating the barrel isn't as much of a concern. Then there's the thing of where I talk about this is the right choice for me. Okay, let me tell you an anecdote to illustrate my point. Someone that I served in the Army with, Staff Sergeant Wilson, yes, that's his real name, we would do training exercises. So we've got the miles gear and our M16 rifles loaded with blanks. and he's got 7 full magazines. We go out and we engage the OPFOR, and we're all shooting at each other and all this kind of stuff. And when the engagement is over, he has emptied 5 magazines. I haven't even emptied 2. I've only changed magazines once. I'm halfway through my 2nd magazine. And that's just the way he did it. And doing it that way worked for him. We took out the OPFOR pretty successfully. Worked for him when he was in Iraq, when he had to do it for real. So no argument the way he does it works, but it's just different than the way I do it. So for him, having the heavy barrel, an advantage. For me, just not so much. So the A1 is, for just about any AR application, that's my go-to rifle. However, talking specifically about TEOTWAWKI, there is something that, in my opinion, makes the A1 not as good a choice as perhaps some others. And that is, when we were talking about handguns and I talked about if foraging occurs, that being able to forage something that can shoot military ammunition or use military magazines would be a plus. Well, the military magazines would apply to just about any AR platform. But the military ammunition is where we run into a snag. These days, your main issue military ammunition is 5.56 NATO with the green tip 62 grain steel core penetrator projectile. And the A1 has a 1 in 12 rifling twist, which stabilizes the 55 grain projectile very well. 62 grain projectile, no. You can shoot the 62 grain projectiles through this rifle. They'll shoot reliably, no problem. But they will start tumbling after a very short distance, and they won't shoot accurately beyond a very short distance. As where the A2, with its 1 in 7 rifling twist, will shoot the 62 grain steel core projectiles, and it will also shoot the 55 grains and many other projectile weights. So, on the off chance that foraging occurs and things like that, this rifle would be able to shoot ammunition that the A1 can't. So specifically for a TEOTWAWKI situation, the A2 is going to be my choice. Okay, the last firearm on my top 5 list, before we get into the ones that I recommend avoiding, is a shotgun. Now, as soon as I say shotgun for TEOTWAWKI purposes, there's a segment of the audience that thinks that's the greatest, shotguns are where it's at, that's the best thing to have, and they want to hear all about it. At the same time, there's just as many, if not more, people that think shotguns are terrible and think I'm stupid for even talking about them, and they will tell you that shotguns have no place in any part of TEOTWAWKI plan. Okay, we all have our opinions. Today we're talking about mine. And I would ask that before you disagree with what I'm saying, at least listen to what I'm saying. Now, shotguns for this application can have some real pluses. They can also have some big minuses, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. But some of the pluses include, first, depending on what type of shotgun you get, they can be very simple to operate. Now, this is an Iver Johnson single shot. Push the lever to the right, it opens, load it with 1 round of ammo, cock the hammer, shoot it, it ejects the empty by itself, load in 1 more round of ammo, close it, and you're back in business. Extremely simple to operate. Shotguns can also be very versatile. Birdshot, buckshot, slugs, sabot slugs, flares, the list goes on ad nauseum. Extremely versatile. And shotguns, depending on your situation and your firearm and ammo choices, can enhance your hit probability. Not so much at really close ranges where the pattern hasn't spread out, but at longer ranges when your pattern is getting a little bigger, especially in low light conditions where it's hard to get a sight picture, a shotgun can enhance your hit probability. And if you're trying to shoot a moving target, shotgun can be a big plus. Shotguns have a lot of pluses. Now, when we're talking about what kinds of shotguns would be good for this application, okay, you have some shotguns that are really geared more toward personal protection, home defense type use, and some that are geared more toward hunting. Now, a lot of your personal protection type shotguns will have a short barrel with a cylinder bore or improved cylinder bore, while a lot of your hunting guns will have comparatively a much longer barrel, often full choke. And the longer barrel with full choke can be a plus because it holds that pattern tighter at longer distances, enhancing your hit probability, because sometimes at long distance you'll miss due to pattern entropy with a shorter barreled gun. So the longer barrel can help you at long distance. Sometimes it can work against you a little bit at really short distance. Depends on where you expect to be. In an environment like this, where you're in a wide open space, the longer barrel doesn't really work against you, but getting in and out of vehicles, doing anything in and around buildings, that longer barrel can become obtrusive. And for most guns, it's going to be a little bit heavier. So if I were to make a recommendation, I'd recommend going with a shorter barreled gun. Now another thing is, a lot of shotguns that are made really more for hunting can have limited magazine capacity. Now, I don't have it here, I got rid of it, but I used to have an auto-loading shotgun, tube magazine under the barrel, but the tube only held 2 rounds. No, it didn't have a plug in it, it was just a 2-shot tube and could not be made to hold any more rounds than that. In a lot of jurisdictions, when you're hunting game birds with a shotgun, you are limited to 3 rounds. So a lot of specific hunting guns aren't made to hold any more than that. So this was a great gun, but for TEOTWAWKI purposes, that's going to leave you a little short. Now, when you buy something like this Mossberg 500, or you get a 590, or many other shotguns with a tube magazine under the barrel, you'll have a tube that'll come up partially to the end of the barrel, or in this case, pretty much all the way to the end of the barrel. And when you buy guns like this, they often have a dowel in there that'll act as a plug, so it'll only hold 2 rounds to keep you within the law for hunting purposes. Obviously, in a WROL situation, you take that dowel out. But guns like this, with the longer tube that will hold a lot more rounds, are a big plus. Now, this Mossberg 500 has a 3-inch chamber, but when loaded with 2 3/4-inch rounds, the tube holds 7. This Remington 870 Tactical, you can see that if I put these two to where the chambers are in about the same place, that the Mossberg has a little bit longer barrel, and the tube goes closer to the end of the barrel than the Remington does. This Remington with 2 3/4-inch ammo has a magazine capacity of 6. Now, as soon as I say that, there's always somebody that will tell me, no it doesn't, it'll only hold 4, or no, it'll hold 7. Okay, I successfully completed kindergarten, I can count to 10, and just a few minutes ago with 2 3/4-inch shells, I loaded this tube, it holds 6, no more. Your 870 might be a little different. And if it is, and it's one of those that has the shorter tube that typically only holds 4, if I were to make a recommendation, it would be get the aftermarket tube extension. They're readily available, reasonably priced, easily installed, and can, depending on your barrel length, add anywhere from 2 to 5 more rounds. A colleague of mine has a Remington 870 that's a hunting gun with a full-length, full-choke barrel. He put on the appropriate tube extension, and now, if I remember right, his shotgun has a capacity of 10+1. Okay, that's a lot. And for most applications, that wouldn't help you much. But for TEOTWAWKI, I'm going to say that's a big plus. Now that brings us to shotguns with detachable box magazines. There are autoloaders that have tubes under the barrel. There are pumps that have detachable box magazines. Now the one I have in this category is the Rock Island Armory VR60, which is an autoloader. When I bought this, it came with 2 5-shot magazines. These 9-shot magazines are readily available. I've also seen a 19-shot magazine that literally was about that long. Okay, that's a lot of rounds, but to me that's overly obtrusive, would not be practical. I think the 9-shot magazines are a better choice. Now, in talking about reloading a gun like this, where all I have to do is pop my magazine out and then put another one in, that's a whole lot faster to reload than a pump or autoloader that has a tube under the barrel. It does have some downsides in that this kind of design does not lend itself as well to a select slug drill as a typical pump does. It also does not lend itself to top-off loading, where when you have a moment, you just stick 1 or 2 more rounds in it. But for shooting till it's empty and reloading quickly, this is a big plus. It can also have the downside of being just a more cumbersome, heavier, more obtrusive kind of gun, but you do get a lot more magazine capacity in the sense that it holds 9 rounds instead of 7, and in the sense that it can be loaded faster. However, this kind of detachable box magazine has a few drawbacks, one of which is people with guns like this sometimes use a word that I think is a very bad word to use. No, you don't have to send your children out of the room. It's a very bad word, and it shouldn't be used very often, almost never in this application. And it's a word that I find being used way too often by preppers and those kind of people. And it's the word gonna. There are a lot of people who base their plan on the word gonna. Now, I could go off on a tangent about this for an hour. I'll try to keep it to just a few minutes. But what happens is that I've had a lot of encounters with people who consider themselves to be doomsday preppers, and they've got a plan and they got all their gear together, and a lot of their gear is based on gonna. And someone will see my Mossberg 500 with a capacity of 7+1, and he'll have some kind of this type of thing, and he'll tell me that it's better because he can put more rounds downrange. Well, to some extent you can, but it also doesn't lend itself as well to a select slug drill. What's that? Okay, there's a clue for you. And it doesn't allow you to top off load. So it has some advantages, but some disadvantages. Also, it won't really load faster because you got to take your magazine out and then put more rounds in it. Oh, no, he doesn't. He can just change magazines. Oh, you have more than one magazine. Okay, well, can I see your other magazine? Oh, no, he doesn't actually have an extra magazine, but it's still better because he's gonna get one. I may have mentioned this before. My 3-day survival pack, and I'm showing this to some people, and somebody is picking apart all the problems with it. Okay, can I see your pack? Oh, he doesn't have one. But someday he's gonna put together a 3-day pack, and when he does, it'll be better than mine. So he's more prepped than me, so if whatever doomsday you're talking about happens tomorrow, the fact that he has a notional idea of something he's gonna put together will make him better off than what I really have. Okay. And I don't want to belabor this point, but to me it is an extremely important point, and it comes up with all kinds of firearms and all kinds of gear, but shotguns is a big one. And in talking about shotguns, I'll illustrate my point by telling you about a .22 rifle. I've got a Remington Nylon 66, that's a .22 autoloader tube magazine with a capacity of 14+1. Okay, somebody else has a Ruger 1022 with a 10-shot detachable box magazine. And he's telling me that his rifle is better than mine because it'll hold more rounds. Okay, hold on. I successfully completed kindergarten. Last time I checked, 14 is more than 10. Oh, no, because the 1022 can use 25-shot magazines. Oh, okay, I haven't seen one of those. And this is long enough ago that they existed, but not everybody had them all the time. Oh, can I see it? Oh, he doesn't actually have one, but he's gonna get one. Okay, well then, even at that, his 10-shot mag is still better than my 14-shot tube because he can pop out that 10, put in another 10, and he really can shoot 20 faster than I can shoot 14 reloading. Oh, okay, well how many 10 shots do you have? Oh, just the one. But he's gonna get more. Gonna is about the most destructive word that there ever was in talking about prepping for TEOTWAWKI, whether you're talking about food, ways to gather food, water, ways to purify water, cold weather or wet weather clothing, guns, ammo, whatever you're talking about, the word gonna is about the most destructive word you can have. If there's anything more destructive, it wouldn't be a word, it'd be a phrase, and the phrase would be, well, that would never happen. If your plan is based on the word gonna, I'm gonna tell you that it's not a very good plan. So if I were to make a recommendation, you're gonna get a gun like this that has detachable box magazines, don't go with the 2 5-shot magazines that come with it. If you can legally do so, get the 9-shot mags, and did you hear the S on that? Mags. Get extra magazines, get several of them, and then figure out some kind of pouch or vest or some way you can carry these big magazines. That's going to be important. Okay, now after that rant, if I were going to make other recommendations about what kind of guns to get, I'm going to say that a pump or autoloader is really good, and I would make the recommendation that if you're going to get a pump shotgun with a tube magazine under the barrel, really about the best ones to have would be some version of the Remington 870 and some version of the Mossberg 590. Now this is a 500, but I'm going to say 590. The reason I have a 500 is because that's the gun I happen to have. Both of these are good quality guns. Both of them will do what you need to do. And both of them have a lot of accessories that you can get to customize these to fit your particular needs. For example, I put a different stock on my 500. You can see the angle of the grip is different. For me, that works better. And the stock is shorter than the original. The original one was too long. Now this one is actually a little bit too short for me. But if I have heavier clothing or my LBV on there, I need that shorter stock. And both of these models lend themselves to that kind of customization. Okay, now with that, talking about what gauge of shotgun. Well, 16 gauge, hold on, 16 gauge is really good, and it creates, in my opinion, an outstanding balance between big enough to get the job done and small enough that it's light, not only the ammo, but the guns to shoot it. However, 16 gauge has become scarce enough that you're going to have difficulty finding the ammo. There aren't a lot of guns out there to shoot it. I have a lot of trouble at my local stores finding ammo like slugs or buckshot. 16 gauge is something I would say avoid that. 20 gauge can be light ammo, light guns, but again, not a lot of diversity in the different types of ammo. When I go to the store, 20 gauge slugs are not nearly as common as 12 gauge slugs. When I find 20 gauge buckshot, the only type I ever find in the store is 2 3/4 inch with number 3 buck. In the entirety of my life, I think there's been, one, maybe two, but I think one occasion where I've actually gone to a gun store and they had 20 gauge buckshot that was something other than number 3. It was number 2, which is still not legal to hunt with in the state in which I reside, obviously in WROL. That wouldn't matter. But you don't have the diversity that you have with 12 gauge. So I would always go with 12 gauge if at all possible. And with the normal caveats of and criteria that it's got to be something you can operate correctly and it has to be something that allows you to hit what you're shooting at. There's a lot of different guns out there. As I said, Remington 870, Mossberg 590, good choices. But the choice I'm going to make is my Mossberg 500. Partially because that's the gun I have. I don't have a 590. Partially because although the VR60 has some obvious pluses, the Mossberg 500 is sleeker, not as clubby and oddly shaped, and a lot easier to carry and a lot lighter. And there's also the thing of, I do have a few of these magazines, but I've never figured out a good way to carry them. I don't have the pouches or bags or something that would allow me to carry them and get to them quickly. So for me, this is going to be a better choice. Okay, now, there you go with shotguns. However, I said shotguns have some downsides, and that brings me to the portion of the presentation where I talk about those types of firearms that I would encourage you to avoid. So on my top 5 list, one of those is a shotgun. On the list of guns that I'd really recommend that you avoid is a shotgun. Okay. Because depending on your situation, what kind of gun you have and so forth, what kind of person you are, a shotgun can be a terrible choice. Because, first, I am of the opinion that part of your plan should be preparing for the possibility that you may have to evacuate on foot. All of a sudden, all those things I've been harping about, the size and weight of your firearm, the size and weight of your ammunition, start coming into play. And shotgun ammo can be bulky and heavy. This box contains 25 rounds of 12 gauge ammo. Now you compare it to this box, this is a little thicker, but it's also not as wide. The two boxes are about the same. But instead of this being able to hold 25 rounds of 12 gauge ammo, this holds 525 rounds of 22 long rifle ammunition. you can see the obvious advantage. And even shotguns like the VR-60 with its 9-shot magazine, which is good capacity as far as shotguns go, fall far short in terms of capacity to this AR platform with a 30-shot mag. Shotguns, if you load them with slugs, can shoot pretty far, but still not as far as just about any rifle you'd use. So shotguns have their pluses, but there's also some reasons why they are something that I would avoid. And if you're someone who lives in Manhattan and your plan is get out, I'm going to say shotgun, bad choice for you. If you're someone who lives in the middle of nowhere and your plan is for just about any situation to stay put, shotgun might be a great choice for you. All depends on who you are, where you are, your capabilities and limitations, and your particular fantasy of what's going to happen. So shotgun's good, shotgun's bad. Now, let me get some new guns and we'll talk about those types of firearms that I really think you should avoid. And some of you already know some of the things that'll be on that list. Now, before we get to the firearms that I would recommend avoiding if you can, I have to reiterate the point that almost any firearm is better than having no firearm at all. And we have to focus on that word almost. There are some exceptions. Let me tell you an anecdote. When I was a little kid, I mean still measuring my age in single digits, my cousin had a break-action single-shot 410 shotgun, similar to the single shot I was showing you earlier, except his was a 410. And he would load that, cock the hammer, pull the trigger, nothing would happen. Cock the hammer, pull the trigger, failure to fire. And after about 5 attempts, he'd finally cock the hammer, pull the trigger, and it would go off. And then he'd reload, and he'd go off on the 2nd try. Reload, and he'd go off on the 3rd or 4th try. Reload, and he'd go off on the 7th try. Okay. You're already talking about a single-shot 410, so that's kind of a minimal gun. Adding that degree of unreliability, to me, puts that in the category of that is worse than having no gun at all. But as long as your firearm works correctly and you have at least some ammo for it, just about any firearm is going to be better than no firearm. Now let's see if I can illustrate that point with a demonstration. This 2 liter of root beer is going to represent whatever small animal you're trying to shoot, and I'm going to shoot at it from a distance of 20 yards. Certainly a lot of people are better archers than I am, but for many of us, single-shot 28 gauge is way better than no gun. Okay, we're just about done. Now we're going to talk about some types of firearms that I would recommend avoiding if you can. And of course, it comes with a disclaimer that for most of us, just about any gun is better than no gun. And also the disclaimer that I'm talking about things that are at least somewhat mainstream. Recently, Kentucky Ballistics did something where I think he was trying to demonstrate a 4-bore rifle. I'm not talking about stuff like that. I'm talking about stuff that actually has a reasonably good chance of being in somebody's gun safe. Okay, with that, guns I would recommend avoiding. First and foremost would be any firearm that's unlawful to possess in the jurisdiction in which you reside. I think we don't need to say any more about that. Now, second on my list, I talked about shotguns and they have pluses and they have minuses, and some shotguns can be good and some shotguns not so much. If a shotgun was what I was going to go with, something I would want is good capacity and the ability to reload quickly. So something I would avoid would be single shot or double barreled shotguns. This single shot Iver Johnson 28 gauge shotgun has proven itself to be a very good hunting gun. And just a moment ago, it certainly proved that, at least for me, just about any gun is better than none. But in a situation where me having to defend myself against a group that outnumbers me is probably going to be more likely than me really having to shoot a goose at 40 yards, I'm going to go with a high capacity shotgun, not a single shot or a double barrel. They can leave you short. Okay, next on my list, and this will be something that will upset a lot of people, but please listen to the verbal fine print before you send me any hate mail. Next on my list of guns that I would avoid if I had a choice would be your stereotypical full-length, full-weight, full-powered bolt-action hunting rifle. When I say full power, I mean things like 308, 30-06, 7mm Remington Magnum. They're powerful rounds. Now, the way most of these work is you open the bolt and then you load one round at a time into the magazine. Most of these aren't set up to use any kind of strip clip. And loading them into the magazine is pretty easy for a lot of people, cumbersome for others, and it's made a little bit more difficult by having the scope in the way. But most of the time, you have to have the scope because a lot of these don't even have sights when you buy them. Firearms like this can be slow to load, have a low capacity like 4 or 5+1, slow to fire, and slow to reload. They're also heavy, cumbersome, and the ammunition is heavy and cumbersome. So this is a kind of rifle that, given the choice, I would avoid. Now, when I say that, a lot of people will tell me how bad and wrong I am, but most of the hate mail will come from one of two factions. One is the sniper fantasy people. Well, what if you have to snipe somebody at 500 yards? Okay, well, one, I don't think that's nearly as likely as other people think it will be. Two, while in the military, I had to shoot for qualification on many occasions, and I did so shooting 500 yards at a man-sized silhouette, well, we call it a man-sized, but he was a pretty skinny man, using a rack-grade M16A1 and military-issue 5.56 NATO ammunition. And I hit that target a whole lot more often than I missed it. So, if you have the high-quality AR that you bought, and then you put a high-quality optic on it, and then you load it with the good quality 5.56 ammunition that you buy, I think you're going to be okay at that distance. Now, the other faction that wants to tell me how wrong I am for excluding bolt-action hunting rifles are the people that are the subsistence hunters. Well, what if you had to shoot a deer? I'm pretty sure that if you shot a deer with your AK, you'd be okay. And even if you had a 5.56, as long as some of your ammunition is some kind of soft point, hollow point, ballistic tip type of hunting ammunition, I think you'd still be okay. Now, one thing that people will ask is, what about these scout rifles? Okay, there's different types of scout rifles, but what most people are talking about is a shorter carbine length bolt-action rifle with a detachable box magazine that sometimes is a 10 or 15 shot. Some of them will even use, I think there's some out there that will use the 30-shot AR magazines. Okay, that changes things because now loading and reloading is a whole lot faster and you have a whole lot more capacity. Still, because it's a bolt action, it's going to be lower on my list than an AK or an AR or something like that. But still, that wouldn't be nearly as bad as your more traditional hunting rifle type of setup. Now, next on my list is something that's going to sound a little bit contradictory, but it's not. Just let me get through this. Ruger Blackhawk 357 Magnum. Now, earlier I said that if this is the only gun you have, or this is the only gun you can shoot accurately, that's what you have to go with. Okay, I'm going to stand by that. But there are some people that even though they have access to other types of firearms, they still want to go with something like this because of what they perceive is its versatility of ammunition when it comes to all this ammo you're going to forage. Now let me demonstrate something. This is a Ruger single 6. Works just like the Blackhawk, but it's caliber 22 long rifle. And when you buy one of these, not always, but most of the time, they'll come with an interchangeable 22 Magnum cylinder. And it's really easy to install the Magnum cylinder. Pop your loading gate open, press a button, pull the pin out, don't lose that pin. Take out your cylinder, put in your cylinder, put the pin back in, and sometimes it can be a little awkward getting all that to line up, and you have to get it in there just right, and you have to jiggle it around and get in there. And there you go. And now it's a 22 Magnum. I find with this one that when I zero it with 22 line rifle, switch to 22 Magnum, my point of impact shifts a little. A colleague of mine has one of these, his point of impact shifts virtually zero. So, depends on which gun you have. That is really cool, and it adds to the versatility of the firearm. Okay. My 357 just has the one cylinder, but Ruger makes a version of this that comes with an additional cylinder that's 9x19, and no, you don't need any kind of moon clips. The shape of the chamber holds the cartridge in the right place, and because you're using this type of ejector rod, it doesn't need a rim to eject it. So this can shoot 38 Special, 357 Magnum, change cylinder to shoot 9x19, and there's some debate over just which other types of 38s will fit into your 357 cylinder. But that makes it really versatile. Now, just a few days ago, I met somebody who said he had the one with the interchangeable 9mm cylinder. Okay, that is really cool, especially since recently, in the area where I live, I go to gun stores, there's plenty of 9mm ammo, but 38 Special and 357 Magnum were really hard to find. So if I had a gun like that, put in the 9mm cylinder, I can keep shooting. Great idea. However, when it comes to TEOTWAWKI, someone selecting a firearm like this with the additional cylinder because of the versatility of ammunition, again, I don't think foraging is going to be that big a part of what's going on. And the advantage you think you get from being able to shoot different types of ammo, to me, doesn't outweigh the disadvantage of a 6-shot single-action revolver compared to a 15+1 auto-loading pistol. And when you compare the single-action revolver to something like this Ruger Security 6, 357 Magnum, double action, swing out cylinder, dump out all 6 at once, I can use a speed loader. What you end up with is when you have a gun that you're trying to combine both of these, you get not enough of either one. And so I think you're far better off sticking with something that can put more rounds downrange. Okay, now there's one more gun I want to show you, and it won't surprise anyone. And it, again, goes at least in part with the idea of people thinking they're going to forage all this ammo. And to me, the idea of what ammo you're going to forage is not nearly as important as being able to use the firearm correctly, carry it safely, shoot it accurately, shoot quickly, reload quickly. And the firearm I'm talking about is, no surprise, the Taurus Judge. Now there's different versions of it. Mine's blued steel with a 3-inch barrel. We have a 4-part series on this revolver, so I don't need to go into all the detail now. But for those who aren't really familiar with it, let me give you the very short version. It's a double action revolver, swing out cylinder, 5-shot capacity, caliber .45 Colt. Now you see this really long cylinder? Again, if you're not familiar with it, it makes sense. Give me a moment. This revolver has a 3-inch rifled barrel. It's just a .45 Colt revolver. However, the extra long cylinder allows it to chamber 4 10-bore shot shells. But it's a .45 Colt revolver that just happens to be able to chamber 410. It is not a shotgun pistol. Okay. Now, why would you have something like this? Well, you have something like this for the versatility of it. And people will talk about if they have to shoot a snake at their feet, well, you have a 410 shot shell. Okay, I find if the snake is that close, where it's close enough to be a danger to me, I can just as easily hit him just with a bullet. There's also the thing of, you know, you can buy .45 Colt shot shells that will work, at least out of this, just about as well as 410 shells will. And people will sing the praises of something like this. Okay, well, if I were to compare that to my 357 Magnum, now let's see. This can shoot 357 Magnum and 38 Special, which are a lot more common than .45 Colt. It's a 6-shot revolver, not a 5-shot. It has speed loaders. I've never seen a speed loader for the Taurus Judge. If they exist, someone please post a link to them. 357 Magnum is more powerful and more common than 45 Colt, yes, but what about 45 ACP? Can you use a moon clip and load this with 45 ACP ammunition? Well, there are 6-shot moon clips out there. This is a 5-shot revolver, and I've never seen a moon clip for it. If they exist, again, I've never heard of them. So you have something that, again, in anything I have ever done with any revolver, anything I can do with the Taurus Judge, I can do more efficiently with another revolver. And as far as the versatility of the ammunition when it comes to foraging, yeah, recently I've found it just about impossible to find 4 10-bore shot shells at any store I've been to. They just don't have any. So unless things change before your predicted doomsday, foraging for that isn't going to be a really fruitful proposition. And if you're talking about a gun like this that can shoot 357 Magnum and 38 Special, and if you have the additional cylinder, 9mm, those are all going to be a whole lot more common than 45 Colt. So this gun is one that I don't need to belabor the point anymore. In terms of a TEOTWAWKI type of gun, this would be on the top of my list or the bottom of my list, depending on how you look at it, as guns you should avoid. Now, I'm sure there's many other types I could talk about, but I just wanted to hit those big ones. Okay, all of that, finally, let's wrap all this up. Okay, to recap. Number 1A, a combo of rifle and pistol that are the same caliber. Number 1B, a combo of rifle and pistol that are the same caliber, and that caliber is .22 long rifle. Number 2, a decent handgun. Number 3, a good pocket gun that really will fit in your pocket and is preferably the same caliber as your full-size handgun. Number 4, a rifle that is preferably semi-auto detachable box magazines, good capacity. And number 5, a shotgun. And what is common to all of these firearms is that you can operate it correctly, use it safely, shoot it accurately, and preferably they will all be calibers or gauges that are fairly common, and firearms and ammunition that are relatively light. If you have detachable box magazines, get a lot of magazines. And finally, firearms to avoid are basically firearms that are the antithesis of everything on the list of things to get. Firearms that have low capacity and are slow to shoot. Firearms that are heavy with ammunition that's heavy. And as always, avoid getting anything that's unlawful in the jurisdiction in which you reside. Now, if you have watched this entire presentation, thank you for your patience. And I have to explain that I understand that I repeated myself on several points many times today. But I have found in this format that there are certain things that if I don't say them multiple times, people will miss them. And specifically talking about TEOTWAWKI, there are certain things that if I don't repeat it literally 4 or 5 times, there are people that won't get it. And that is just something about this particular subject. So my apologies to the intelligentsia who had to put up with the redundancy, but I'm sure this isn't the first time you've had to wait for the slowest kid in class. So, as always, don't try this at home on what you call a professional, and thanks for watching the very long version of my top 5 guns for SHTF or WROL or TEOTWAWKI.